Hello, and welcome to the Deerfield Public Library Twitch channel. I'm Anne, and this is Lunchtime Listens. We are pre-recording this week because vacations and other things that get in the way of live streaming. So last week, the Fellowship fought some wargs, which are basically big wolves. They're messed up wolves, and they made it to the mines of Moria. I do want to make it clear that Bill the Pony does make it back to Rivendell. He does. He survives. So they made it into Moria. They're kind of walking around. Frodo thinks he's being followed, and they found out that Balin is dead, unfortunately. And that is where we pick up this week. With Chapter 5, The Bridge of Khazad-dûm. The Company of the Ring stood silent beside the tomb of Balin. Frodo thought of Bilbo and his long friendship with the dwarf, and of Balin's visit to the Shire long ago. In that dusty chamber in the mountains, it seemed 1,000 years ago and on the other side of the world. At length they stirred and looked up and began to search for anything that would give them tidings of Balin's fate or show what had become of his folk. There was another smaller door on the other side of the chamber under the shaft. By both the doors they could now see that many bones were lying, and among them were broken swords and axe heads and cloven shields and helms. Some of the swords were crooked, orc scimitars with blackened blades. There were many recesses cut in the rock of the walls, and in them were large iron-bound chests of wood. All had been broken and plundered, but beside the shattered lid of one there lay the remains of a book. It had been slashed and stabbed and partly burned, and it was so stained with black and other dark marks like old blood that little of it could be read. Gandalf lifted it carefully, but the leaves crackled and broke as he laid it on the slab. He pored over it for some time without speaking. Frodo and Gimli, standing at his side, could see, as he gingerly turned the leaves, that they were written by many different hands, in runes both of Moria and of Dale, and here and there in Elvish script. At last Gandalf looked up. "It seems to be a record of the fortunes of Balin's folks," he said. "I guess that it began with their coming to Dimril Dale nigh on 30 years ago. The pages seem to have numbers referring to the years after their arrival. The top page is marked 1 to 3, so at least 2 are missing from the beginning. Listen to this. We drove out orcs from the Great Gate and Guard. I think the next word is blurred and burned, probably room. We slew many in the bright, I think sun, in the dale. Floy was killed by an arrow. He slew the great. Then there is a blur, followed by Floy under grass near Miromir. The next line or two I cannot read. Then comes, we have taken the 21st hall of North End to dwell in. There is, I cannot read what, a shaft is mentioned. Then Balin has set up his seat in the chamber of Mazarbul. The chamber of records, said Gimli. I guess that is where we now stand. Well, I can read no more for a long way, said Gandalf. Except the word gold and Durin's axe and something helm. Then Balin is now Lord of Moria. That seems to end a chapter. After some stars, another hand begins, and I can see we found true silver, and later the word well forged, and then something. I have it, Mithril. And the last 2 lines, oin to seek for the upper armories of Third Deep. Something go westwards, a blur to Holland Gate. Gandalf paused and set a few leaves aside. There are several pages of the same sort, rather hastily written and much damaged, he said, but I can make little of them in this light. Now there must be a number of leaves missing, because they begin to be numbered 5, the 5th year of the colony, I suppose. Let me see. No, they are too cut and stained. I cannot read them. We might do better in the sunlight. Wait, here is something, a large bold hand using an Elvish script. That would be Ori's hand, said Gimli, looking over the wizard's arm. He could write well and speedily, and often use the Elvish characters. I fear he had ill tidings to record in a fair hand, said Gandalf. The first clear word is sorrow, but the rest of the line is lost. Unless it ends in estre. Yes, it must be yestre, found by day, being the 10th of November, Balin, Lord of Moria, fell in Dimril Dale. He went alone to look in Miromir. An orc shot him from behind a stone. We slew the orc, but many more, up from the east of the Silverlode. The remainder of the page is so blurred that I can hardly make anything out, but I think I can read, we have barred the gates, and then can hold them long if, and then perhaps horrible and suffer. Poor Balin, He seems to have kept the title he took for less than 5 years. I wonder what happened afterwards, but there's no time to puzzle out the last few pages. Here's the last page of all. He paused and sighed. It is grim reading, he said. I fear their end was cruel. Listen, we cannot get out. We cannot get out. They have taken the bridge and second hall. Frar and Loni and Nali fell there. Then there are 4 lines smeared so that I can only read went 5 days ago. The last lines run, the pool is up to the wall at Westgate. The watcher in the water took Oin. We cannot get out. The end comes. And then drums, drums in the deep. I wonder what that means. The last thing written is in a trailing scrawl of elf letters. They are coming. There is nothing more. Gandalf paused and stood in silent thought. A sudden dread and horror of the chamber fell on the company. We cannot get out, muttered Gimli. It was well for us that the pool had sunk a little and that the watcher was sleeping down at the southern end. Gandalf raised his head and looked round. They seemed to have made a last stand by both doors, he said, but there were not many left by that time. So ended the attempt to retake Moria. It was valiant but foolish. The time has not come yet. Now, I fear, we must say farewell to Balin, son of Fundine. Here he must lie in the halls of his fathers. We will take this book, the Book of Mazarbul, and look at it more closely later. You had better keep it, Gimli, and take it back to Dane if you get a chance. It will interest him, though it will grieve him deeply. Come, let us go. The morning is passing. Which way shall we go? Asked Boromir. Back to the hall, answered Gandalf, but our visit to this room has not been in vain. I now know where we are. This must be, as Gimli says, the chamber of Mazarbul, and the hall must be the 21st of the north end. Therefore we should leave by the eastern arch of the hall and bear right and south and go downwards. The 21st hall should be on the 7th level, that is 6 above the level of the gates. Come now, back to the hall. Gandalf had hardly spoken these words when there came a great noise, a rolling boom that seemed to come from depths far below and to tremble in the stone at their feet. They sprang towards the door in alarm. Doom, doom, it rolled again, as if huge hands were turning the very caverns of Moria into a vast drum. Then there came an echoing blast. A great horn was blown out in the hall, and answering horns and harsh cries were heard farther off. There was a hurrying sound of many feet. They are coming, cried Legolas. We cannot get out, said Gimli. Trapped, cried Gandalf. Why did I delay? Here we are caught, just as they were before. But I was not here then. We will see what. Doom, doom, came the drumbeat, and the walls shook. Slam the doors and wedge them, shouted Aragorn, and keep your packs on as long as you can. We may get a chance to cut our way out yet. No, said Gandalf, we must not get shut in. Keep the east door ajar. We will go that way if we get a chance. Another harsh horn call and shrill cries rang out. Feet were coming down the corridor. There was a ring and clatter as the company drew their swords. Glamdring shone with a pale light and Sting glinted at the edges. Boromir set his shoulder against the western door. Wait a moment, do not close it yet, said Gandalf. He sprang forward to Boromir's side and drew himself up to his full height. Who comes hither to disturb the rest of Balin, Lord of Moria? He cried in a loud voice. There was a rush of hoarse laughter, like the fall of sliding stones into a pit. Amid the clamor, a deep voice was raised in command. Doom, boom, doom, went the drums in the deep. With a quick movement, Gandalf stepped before the narrow opening of the door and thrust forward his staff. There was a dazzling flash that lit the chamber and the passage outside. For an instant, the wizard looked out. Arrows whined and whistled down the corridor as he sprang back. There are orcs, very many of them, he said, and some are large and evil, black orcs of Mordor. For the moment they are hanging back, but there is something else there, a great cave troll, I think, or more than one. There is no hope of escape that way. And no hope at all if they come at the other door as well, said Boromir. There's no sound outside here yet, said Aragorn, who was standing by the eastern door listening. The passage on this side plunges straight down a stair. It plainly does not lead back towards the hall. But it is no good flying blindly this way with the pursuit just behind. We cannot block the door. Its key is gone and the lock is broken and it opens inwards. We must do something to delay the enemy first. We will make them fear the chamber of Mazarbul, he said grimly, feeling the edge of his sword and Duriel. Heavy feet were heard in the corridor. Boromir flung himself against the door and heaved it to. Then he wedged it with broken sword blades and splinters of wood. The company retreated to the other side of the chamber, but they had no chance to fly yet. There was a blow on the door that made it quiver, and then it began to grind slowly open, driving back the wedges. A huge arm and shoulder with a dark skin of greenish scales was thrust through the widening gap. Then a great flat toeless foot was forced through below. There was a dead silence outside. Boromir leapt forward and hewed at the arm with all his might, but his sword rang, glanced aside, and fell from his shaken hand. The blade was notched. Suddenly, and to his own surprise, Frodo felt a hot wrath blaze up in his heart. "The Shire!" he cried, and springing beside Boromir, he stooped and stabbed with Sting at the hideous foot. There was a bellow, and the foot jerked back, nearly wrenching Sting from Frodo's arm. Black drops dripped from the blade and smoked on the floor. Boromir hurled himself against the door and slammed it again. "One for the Shire!" cried Aragorn. "The hobbit's bite is deep. You have a good blade, Frodo, son of Drogo." There was a crash on the door, followed by crash after crash. Rams and hammers were beating against it. It cracked and staggered back, and the opening grew suddenly wide. Arrows came whistling in, but struck the northern wall and fell harmlessly to the floor. There was a horn blast and a rush of feet, and orcs, one after another, leaped into the chamber. How many there were, the company could not count. The affray was sharp, but the orcs were dismayed by the fierceness of the defense. Legolas shot two through the throat. Gimli hewed the legs from under another that had sprung up on Balin's tomb. Boromir and Aragorn slew many. When 13 had fallen, the rest fled, shrieking, leaving the defenders unharmed, except for Sam, who had a scratch along the scalp. A quick duck had saved him, and he had felled his orc, a sturdy thrust with his barrow blade. A fire was smoldering in his brown eyes that would have made Ted Sandyman step backwards if he had seen it. "Now is the time," cried Gandalf. "Let us go before the troll returns." But even as they retreated, and before Pippin and Merry had reached the stair outside, a huge orc chieftain, almost man-high, clad in black mail from head to foot, leaped into the chamber, and behind him his followers clustered in the doorway. His broad, flat face was swart, his eyes were like coals, and his tongue was red. He wielded a great spear. With a thrust of his huge hide shield, he turned Boromir's sword and bore him backwards, throwing him to the ground. Diving under Aragorn's blow with the speed of a striking snake, he charged into the company and thrust with his spear straight at Frodo. The blow caught him in the right side, and Frodo was hurled against the wall and pinned. Sam, with a cry, hacked at the spear shaft, and it broke. But even as the orc flung down the truncheon and swept out his scimitar, Andúril came down upon his helm. There was a flash like flame, and the helm burst asunder. The orc fell with cloven head. His followers fled howling as Boromir and Aragorn sprang at them. Doom, doom, went the drums in the deep. The great voice rolled out again. "Now," shouted Gandalf, "now is the last chance. Run for it." Aragorn picked up Frodo where he lay by the wall and made for the stair, pushing Merry and Pippin in front of him. The others followed, but Gimli had to be dragged away by Legolas. In spite of the peril, he lingered by Balin's tomb with his head bowed. Boromir hauled the eastern door to, grinding upon its hinges. It had great iron rings on either side, but could not be fastened. "I'm all right," gasped Frodo. "I can walk. Put me down." Aragorn nearly dropped him in his amazement. "I thought you were dead," he cried. "Not yet," said Gandalf, "but there is no time for wonder. Off you go, all of you, down the stairs. Wait a few minutes for me at the bottom, but if I do not come soon, go on. Go quickly and choose paths leading right and downward." "We cannot leave you to hold the door alone," said Aragorn. "Do as I say," said Gandalf fiercely. "Swords are no more use here. Go!" The passage was lit by no shaft and was utterly dark. They groped their way down a long flight of steps and then looked back, but they could see nothing, except high above them the faint glimmer of the wizard's staff. He seemed to be standing on guard by the closed door. Frodo breathed heavily and leaned against Sam, who put his arms around him. They stood peering up the stairs into the darkness. Frodo thought he could hear the voice of Gandalf above, muttering words that ran down the sloping roof with a sighing echo. He could not catch what was said. The walls seemed to be trembling now. Every now and again the drum beats throbbed and rolled. Doom, doom. Suddenly at the top of the stair there was a stab of white light. Then there was a dull rumble and a heavy thud. The drum beats broke out wildly. Doom, boom, doom, boom, and then stopped. Gandalf came flying down the steps and fell to the ground in the midst of the company. "Well, well, that's over," said the wizard, struggling to his feet. "I have done all that I could, but I have met my match and have nearly been destroyed. But don't stand here. Go on. You will have to do without light for a while. I am rather shaken. Go on, go on. Where are you, Gimli? Come ahead with me." Keep close behind, all of you." They stumbled after him, wondering what had happened. Doom, doom went the drum beats again. They now sounded muffled and far away, but they were following. There was no other sound of pursuit, neither tramp of feet nor any voice. Gandalf took no turns, right or left, for the passage seemed to be going in the direction that he desired. Every now and again it descended a flight of steps, 50 or more, to a lower level. At the moment, that was their chief danger, for in the dark they could not see a descent until they came on it and put their feet out into emptiness. Gandalf felt the ground with his staff like a blind man. At the end of an hour they had gone a mile, or maybe a little more, and had descended many flights of stairs. There was still no sound of pursuit. Almost they began to hope that they would escape. At the bottom of the 7th flight, Gandalf halted. "It is getting hot," he gasped. "We ought to be down at least at the level of the gates now. Soon I think we should look for a left-hand turn to take us east. I hope it is not far. I am very weary. I must rest here a moment, even if all the orcs ever spawned are after us." Gimli took his arm and helped him down to his seat on the step. "What happened away up there at the door?" he asked. "Did you meet the beater of the drums?" "I do not know," answered Gandalf, "but I found myself suddenly faced by something that I have not met before. I could think of nothing to do but to try and put a shutting spell on the door. I know many, but to do things of that kind rightly requires time, and even then the door can be broken by strength. As I stood there, I could hear orc voices on the other side. At any moment, I thought they would burst it open. I could not hear what was said. They seemed to be talking in their own hideous language. All I caught was gash, and that is fire. Then something came into the chamber. I felt it through the door, and the orcs themselves were afraid and fell silent. It laid hold of the iron ring, and then it perceived me and my spell. What it was I cannot guess, but I have never felt such a challenge. The counterspell was terrible. It nearly broke me. For an instant, the door left my control and began to open. I had to speak a word of command. That proved too great a strain. The door burst into pieces. Something dark as a cloud was blocking out all the light inside, and I was thrown backwards down the stairs. All the wall gave way, and the roof of the chamber as well, I think. I am afraid Balin is buried deep, and maybe something else is buried there too. I cannot say, but at least the passage behind us was completely blocked. I have never felt so spent, but it is passing. And now what about you, Frodo? There was not time to say so, but I have never been more delighted in my life than when you spoke. I feared that was a brave but dead hobbit that Aragorn was carrying. What about me, said Frodo. I am alive and whole, I think. I am bruised and in pain, but it is not too bad. Well, said Aragorn, I can only say that hobbits are made of a stuff so tough that I have never met the like of it. Had I known, I would have spoken softer in the inn and prayed. That spear thrust would have skewered a wild boar. Well, it did not skewer me, I'm glad to say, said Frodo, though I feel as if I had been caught between a hammer and an anvil. He said no more. He found breathing painful. You take after Bilbo, said Gandalf. There's more about you than meets the eye, as I said of him long ago. Frodo wondered if the remark meant more than was said. They now went on again. Before long, Gimli spoke. He had keen eyes in the dark. I think, he said, that there is a light ahead, but it is not daylight. It is red. What can it be? Gosh, muttered Gandalf. I wonder if that's what they meant, that the lower levels are on fire? Still, we can only go on. Soon the light became unmistakable and could be seen by all. It was flickering and glowing on the walls away down the passage before them. They could now see their way. In front, the road sloped down swiftly, and some way ahead there stood a low archway. Through it, the growing light came. The air became very hot. When they came to the arch, Gandalf went through, signing to them to wait. As he stood just beyond the opening, they saw his face lit by a red glow. Quickly he stepped back. There's some new devilry here, he said, devised for our welcome, no doubt. But I know now where we are. We have reached the first deep, the level immediately below the gates. This is the second hall of Old Moria, and the gates are near, away beyond the eastern end on the left, not more than a quarter of a mile. Across the bridge, up a broad stair, along a wide road, through the first hall and out. But come and look. They peered out. Before them was another cavernous hall. It was loftier and far longer than the one in which they had slept. They were near its eastern end. Westward, it ran away into darkness. Down the center stalked a double line of towering pillars. They were carved like boles of mighty trees whose boughs upheld the roof with a branching tracery of stone. Their stems were smooth and black, but a red glow was darkly mirrored in their sides. Right across the floor, close to the feet of two huge pillars, a great fissure had opened. Out of it, a fierce red light came, and now and again flames licked at the rink and curled about the bases of the columns. Wisps of dark smoke wavered in the hot air. "If we had come by the main road down from the upper halls, we should have been trapped here," said Gandalf. "Let us hope that the fire now lies between us and pursuit. Come, there is no time to lose." Even as he spoke, they heard again the pursuing drumbeat. Doom, doom, doom. Away beyond the shadows at the western end of the hall, there came cries and horn calls. Doom, doom. The pillars seemed to tremble and the flames to quiver. "Now for the last race," said Gandalf. "If the sun is shining outside, we may still escape. After me." He turned left and sped across the smooth floor of the hall. The distance was greater than it had looked. As they ran, they heard the beat and echo of many hurrying feet behind. A shrill yell went up. They had been seen. There was a ring and a clash of steel. An arrow whistled over Frodo's head. Boromir laughed. "They did not expect this," he said. "The fire has cut them off. We are on the wrong side." "Look ahead," cried Gandalf. "The bridge is near. It is dangerous and narrow." Suddenly, Frodo saw before him a black chasm. At the end of the hall, the floor vanished and fell into an unknown depth. The outer door could only be reached by a slender bridge of stone, without curb or rail, that spanned the chasm with one curving spring of 50 feet. It was an ancient defense of the dwarves against any enemy that might capture the first hall and the outer passages. They could only pass across it in a single file. At the brink, Gandalf halted, and the others came up in a pack behind. "Lead the way, Gimli," he said. "Pippin and Merry next. Straight on and up the stair beyond the door." Arrows fell among them. One struck Frodo and sprang back. Another pierced Gandalf's hat and stuck there like a black feather. Frodo looked behind. Beyond the fire, he saw swarming black figures. There seemed to be hundreds of orcs. They brandished spears and scimitars which shone red as blood in the firelight. Doom, doom, rolled the drum beats, growing louder and louder. Doom, doom. Legolas turned and set an arrow to the string, though it was a long shot for his small bow. He drew, but his hand fell, and the arrow slipped to the ground. He gave a cry of dismay and fear. Two great trolls appeared. They bore great slabs of stone and flung them down to serve as gangways over the fire. But it was not the trolls that had filled the elf with terror. The ranks of the orcs had opened, and they crowded away as if they themselves were afraid. Something was coming up behind them. What it was could not be seen. It was like a great shadow, in the middle of which was a dark form, of man-shape maybe, yet greater, and a power and terror seemed to be in it and to go before it. It came to the edge of the fire, and the light faded as if a cloud had bent over it. Then with a rush, it leaped across the fissure. The flames roared up to greet it and wreathed about it, and a black smoke swirled in the air. Its streaming mane kindled and blazed behind it. In its right hand was a blade like a stabbing tongue of fire. In its left, it held a whip of many thongs. "Aye, aye," wailed Legolas, "a Balrog! A Balrog has come!" Gimli stared with wide eyes. "Durin's bane," he cried, and letting his axe fall, he covered his face. "A Balrog," muttered Gandalf. "Now I understand." He faltered and leaned heavily on his staff. "What an evil fortune, and I am already weary." The dark figures streaming with fire raced towards them. The orcs yelled and poured over the stone gangways. Then Boromir raised his horn and blew. Loud the challenge rang and bellowed like the shout of many throats under the cavernous roof. For a moment the orcs quailed and the fiery shadow halted. Then the echoes died as suddenly as a flame blown out by a dark wind, and the enemy advanced again. "Over the bridge!" cried Gandalf, recalling his strength. "Fly! This is a foe beyond any of you. I must hold the narrow way. Fly!" Aragorn and Boromir did not heed the command, but still held their ground, side by side behind Gandalf at the far end of the bridge. The others halted just within the doorway at the hall's end and turned, unable to leave their leader to face the enemy alone. The Balrog reached the bridge. Gandalf stood in the middle of the span, leaning on the staff in his left hand, but in his other hand Glamdring gleamed cold and white. His enemy halted again, facing him, and the shadow about it reached out like two vast wings. It raised the whip, and the thongs whined and cracked. Fire came from its nostrils, but Gandalf stood firm. "You cannot pass," he said. The orcs stood still, and a dead silence fell. I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. You cannot pass. Dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass. The Balrog made no answer. The fire in it seemed to die, but the darkness grew. It stepped forward slowly onto the bridge, and suddenly it drew itself up to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall. But still Gandalf could be seen, glimmering in the gloom. He seemed small and altogether alone, gray and bent like a wizened tree before the onset of a storm. From out of the shadow, a red sword leaped, flaming. Glamdring glittered white in answer. There was a ringing clash and a stab of white fire. The Balrog fell back, and its sword flew up in molten fragments. The wizard swayed on the bridge, stepped back a pace, and then again stood still. You cannot pass, he said. With a bound, the Balrog leaped full upon the bridge. Its whip whirled and hissed. He cannot stand alone, cried Aragorn suddenly, and ran back along the bridge. Elendil, he shouted. I am with you, Gandalf. Gondor, cried Boromir, and leapt after him. At that moment, Gandalf lifted his staff, and crying aloud, he smote the bridge before him. The staff broke asunder and fell from his hand. A blinding sheet of white flame sprang up. The bridge cracked. Right at the Balrog's feet it broke, and the stone upon which it stood crashed into the gulf, while the rest remained poised, quivering like a tongue of rock thrust out into emptiness. With a terrible cry, the Balrog fell forward, and its shadow plunged down and vanished. But even as it fell, it swung its whip, and the thongs lashed and curled about the wizard's knees, dragging him to the brink. He staggered and fell, grasped vainly at the stone, and slid into the abyss. Fly, you fools, he cried, and was gone. The fires went out, and blank darkness fell. The company stood rooted with horror, staring into the pit. Even as Aragorn and Boromir came flying back, the rest of the bridge cracked and fell. With a cry, Aragorn roused them. Come, I will lead you now, he called. We must obey his last command. Follow me. They stumbled wildly up the great stairs beyond the door, Aragorn leading, Boromir at the rear. At the top was a wide, echoing passage. Along this they fled. Frodo heard Sam at his side weeping, and then he found that he himself was weeping as he ran. Doom, doom, doom. The drum beats rolled behind, mournful now and slow. Doom. They ran on. The light grew before them. Great shafts pierced the roof. They ran swifter. They passed into a hall, bright with daylight from its high windows in the east. They fled across it. Through its huge broken doors they passed, and suddenly before them the great gates opened, an arch of blazing light. There was a guard of orcs crouching in the shadows behind the great doorposts towering on either side, but the gates were shattered and cast down. Aragorn smote to the ground the captain that stood in his path, and the rest fled in terror of his wrath. The company swept past them and took no heed of them. Out of the gates they ran and sprang down the huge and age-worn steps, the threshold of Moria. Thus, at last, they came beyond hope under the sky and felt the wind on their faces. They did not halt until they were out of bowshot from the walls. Dimril Dale lay about them. The shadow of the misty mountains lay upon it, but eastward there was a golden light on the land. It was but 1 hour after noon. The sun was shining, the clouds were white and high. They looked back. Dark yawned the archway of the gates under the mountain shadow. Faint and far beneath the earth rolled the slow drum beats. Doom. A thin black smoke trailed out. Nothing else was to be seen. The dale all around was empty. Doom. Grief at last wholly overcame them, and they wept long, some standing and silent, some cast upon the ground. Doom. Doom. The drum beats faded. Chapter 6. Lothlorien. Alas, I fear we cannot stay here longer, said Aragorn. He looked towards the mountains and held up his sword. Farewell, Gandalf, he cried. Did I not say to you, if you pass the doors of Moria, beware? Alas, that I spoke true. What hope have we without you? He turned to the company. We must do without hope, he said. At least we may yet be avenged. Let us gird ourselves and weep no more. Come, we have a long road and much to do. They rose and looked about them. Northward, the dale ran up into a glen of shadows between two great arms of the mountains, above which 3 white peaks were shining: Celebdil, Fanadwell, Caradras, the mountains of Moria. At the head of the glen, a torrent flowed like a white lace over an endless ladder of short falls, and a mist of foam hung in the air about the mountain's feet. "Yonder is the Dimmerel Stair," said Aragorn, pointing to the falls. "Down the deep cloven way that climbs beside the torrent we should have come, if fortune had been kinder. Or Caradras less cruel," said Gimli. "There he stands smiling in the sun." He shook his fist at the furthest of the snow-capped peaks and turned away. To the east, the outflung arm of the mountains marched to a sudden end, and far lands could be descried beyond them, far, wide, and vague. To the south, the misty mountains receded endlessly as far as sight could reach. Less than a mile away, and a little below them, for they still stood high up on the west side of the dale, there lay a mere. It was long and oval, shaped like a great spearhead thrust deep into the northern glen, but its southern end was beyond the shadows under the sunlit sky. Yet its waters were dark, a deep blue like clear evening sky seen from a lamplit room. Its face was still and unruffled. About it lay a smooth sward, shelving down on all sides to its bare, unbroken rim. "There lies the Mirror, deep Celebzaram," said Gimli sadly. "I remember that he said, 'May you have joy of the sight,' but we cannot linger here. Now long shall I journey ere I have joy again. It is I that must hasten away, and he that must remain." The company now went down the road from the gates. It was rough and broken, fading to a winding track between heather and wind that thrust amid the cracking stones. But still it could be seen that once long ago a great paved way had wound upwards from the lowlands of the dwarf kingdom. In places there were ruined works of stone beside the path, and mounds of green topped with slender birches or fir trees sighing in the wind. An eastward bend led them hard by the sward of Mirror, and there, not far from the roadside, stood a single column broken at the top. "That is Durin's stone," cried Gimli. "I cannot pass without turning aside for a moment to look at the wonder of the dale." "Be swift then," said Aragorn, looking back towards the gates. "The sun sinks early. The orcs will not maybe come out till after dusk, but we must be far away before nightfall. The moon is almost spent, and it will be dark tonight." "Come with me, Frodo," cried the dwarf, springing from the road. "I would not have you go without seeing Celebzaram." He ran down the long green slope. Frodo followed slowly, drawn by the still blue water in spite of hurt and weariness. Sam came up behind. Beside the standing stone, Gimli halted and looked up. It was cracked and weather-worn, and the faint runes upon its side could not be read. "This pillar marks the spot where Durin first looked in the Mirror," said the dwarf. "Let us look ourselves at once, ere we go." They stooped over the dark water. At first they could see nothing. Then slowly they saw the forms of the encircling mountains mirrored in a profound blue, and the peaks were like a plume of white flame above them. Beyond there was a space of sky. There, like jewels sunk into it in the deep, shone glinting stars, though sunlight was in the sky above. Of their own stooping forms, no shadow could be seen. "O Celebzaram, fair and wonderful," said Gimli. "There lies the crown of Durin till he wakes. Farewell." He bowed and turned away and hastened back up the greensward to the road again. "What did you see?" said Pippin to Sam, but Sam was too deep in thought to answer. The road now turned south and went quickly downwards, running out from beyond the arms of the dale. Some way below the mirror they came on a deep well of water, clear as crystal, from which a freshet fell over a stone lip and ran glistening and gurgling down a steep rocky channel. "Here is the spring from which Silverlode rises," said Gimli. "Do not drink of it. It is icy cold. Soon it becomes a swift river, and it gathers water from many other mountain streams," said Aragorn. "Our road leads beside it for many miles, for I shall take you by the road that Gandalf chose, and first I hope to come to the woods where the Silverlode flows into the great river, out yonder." They looked as he pointed, and below them they could see the stream leaping down the trough to the trough of the valley, and then running on and away into the lower lands until it was lost in a golden haze. "There lie the woods of Lothlorien," said Legolas. "That is the fairest of all the dwellings of my people. There are no trees like the trees of that land, for in the autumn their leaves fall not, but turn to gold. Not till the spring comes and the new green opens do they fall, and then the boughs are laden with yellow flowers, and the floor of the wood is golden, and golden is the roof, and its pillars are of silver, for the bark of the trees is smooth and gray. So still our songs in Mirkwood say. My heart would be glad if I were beneath the eaves of that wood and it were springtime. My heart will be glad even in the winter, said Aragorn, but it lies many miles away. Let us hasten. For some time, Frodo and Sam managed to keep up with the others, but Aragorn was leading them at a great pace, and after a while they lagged behind. They had eaten nothing since the early morning. Sam's cut was burning like fire, and his head felt light. In spite of the shining sun, the wind seemed chill after the warm darkness of Moria. He shivered. Frodo felt every step more painful, and he gasped for breath. At last, Legolas turned, and seeing them now far behind, he spoke to Aragorn. The others halted, and Aragorn ran back, calling to Boromir to come with him. I am sorry, Frodo, he cried, full of concern. So much has happened this day, and we have such need of haste that I have forgotten that you were hurt, and Sam too. You should have spoken. We have done nothing to ease you as we ought, though all the orcs of Moria were after us. Come now. A little further on there is a place where we can rest for a little. There I will do what I can for you. Come, Boromir, we will carry them. Soon afterwards, they came upon another stream that ran down from the west and joined its bubbling water with the hurrying Silverlode. Together they plunged over a fall of green-hued stone and foamed down into a dell. About it stood fir trees, short and bent, and its sides were steep and clothed with hartstongue and shrubs of whortleberry. At the bottom there was a level space through which the stream flowed noisily over shining pebbles. Here they rested. It was now nearly 3 hours after noon, and they had come only a few miles from the gates. Already the sun was westering. While Gimli and the two younger hobbits kindled a fire of brush and firwood and drew water, Aragorn tended Sam and Frodo. Sam's wound was not deep, but it looked ugly, and Aragorn's face was grave as he examined it. After a moment he looked up with relief. Good luck, Sam, he said. Many received worse than this in payment for the slaying of their first orc. The cut is not poisoned, as the wounds of orc blades too often are. It should heal well when I have tended it. Bathe it when Gimli has heated water. He opened his pouch and drew out some withered leaves. They are dry, and some of their virtue has gone, he said. But here I have still some of the leaves of Ethelas that I gathered near Weathertop. Crush one in the water and wash the wound clean, and I will bind it. Now it is your turn, Frodo. I'm all right, said Frodo, reluctant to have his garments touched. All I needed was some food and a little rest. No, said Aragorn. We must have a look and see what the hammer and the anvil have done to you. I still marvel that you are alive at all. Gently he stripped off Frodo's old jacket and worn tunic and gave a gasp of wonder. Then he laughed. The silver corselet shimmered before his eyes like the light upon a rippling sea. Carefully he took it off and held it up, and the gems on it glittered like stars, and the sound of the shaken rings was like a tinkle of rain in a pool. Look, my friends, he called. Here's a pretty hobbit skin to wrap an elven princeling in. If it was known that hobbits had such hides, all the hunters of Middle-earth would be riding to the Shire, and all the arrows of all the hunters in the world would be in vain, said Gimli, gazing at the mail in wonder. It is a mithril coat. Mithril! I have never seen or heard tell of one so fair. Is this the coat that Gandalf spoke of? Then he undervalued it. But it was well given. I have often wondered what you and Bilbo were doing so close in his little room, said Merry. Bless the old hobbit. I love him more than ever. I hope we get a chance of telling him about it. There was a dark and blackened bruise on Frodo's right side and breast. Under the mail there was a shirt of soft leather, but at one point the rings had been driven through it into the flesh. Frodo's left side also was scored and bruised where he had been hurled against the wall. While the others set the food ready, Aragorn bathed the hurts with water in which Ethelas was steeped. The pungent fragrance filled the dell, and all those who stooped over the steaming water felt refreshed and strengthened. Soon Frodo felt the pain leave him, and his breath grew easy, though he was stiff and sore to the touch for many days. Aragorn bound some soft pads of cloth at his side. The mail is marvelously light, he said. Put it on again if you can bear it. My heart is glad to know that you have such a coat. Do not lay it aside, even in sleep, unless fortune brings you where you are safe for a while, and that will seldom chance while your quest lasts. When they had eaten, the company got ready to go on. They put out the fire and hid all traces of it. Then, climbing out of the dell, they took to the road again. They had not gone far before the sun sank behind the westward heights and great shadows crept down the mountainsides. Dusk veiled their feet and mist rose in the hollows. Away in the east, the evening light lay pale upon the dim lands of distant plain and wood. Sam and Frodo, now feeling eased and greatly refreshed, were able to go at a fair pace, and with only one brief halt, Aragorn led the company on for nearly 3 more hours. It was dark. Deep night had fallen. There were many clear stars, but the fast waning moon would not be seen till late. Gimli and Frodo were at the rear, walking softly and not speaking, listening for any sound upon the road behind. At length, Gimli broke the silence. "Not a sound but the wind," he said. "There are no goblins near, or my ears are made of wood. It is to be hoped that the orcs will be content with driving us from Moria. Or maybe that was all their purpose, and they had nothing else to do with us, with the ring. Though orcs will often pursue foes for many leagues into the plain if they have a fallen captain to avenge." Frodo did not answer. He looked at Sting, and the blade was dull. Yet he had heard something, or thought he had. As soon as the shadows had fallen about them and the road behind was dim, he had heard again the quick patter of feet. Even now he heard it. He turned swiftly. There were two tiny gleams of light behind, or for a moment he thought he saw them. But at once they slipped aside and vanished. "What is it?" said the dwarf. "I don't know," answered Frodo. "I thought I heard feet, and I thought I saw a light, like eyes. I have thought so often since we first entered Moria." Gimli halted and stooped to the ground. "I hear nothing but the night speech of plant and stone," he said. "Come, let us hurry. The others are out of sight." The night wind blew chill up the valley to meet them. Before them a wide gray shadow loomed, and they heard an endless rustle of leaves like poplars in the breeze. "Lothlorien!" cried Legolas. "Lothlorien! We have come to the eaves of the Golden Wood. Alas, that it is winter!" Under the night, the tree stood tall before them, arched over the road, and stream that ran suddenly beneath their spreading boughs. In the dim light of the stars, their stems were gray, and their quivering leaves a hint of fallow gold. "Lothlorien," said Aragorn, "glad I am to hear again the wind in the trees. We are still little more than 5 leagues from the gates, but we can go no further. Here let us hope that the virtue of the elves will keep us tonight from the peril that comes behind. If elves indeed still dwell here in the darkening world," said Gimli. "It is long since any of my own folk journeyed hither back to the land whence we wandered in ages long ago," said Legolas. "But we hear that Lorien is not yet deserted, for there is a secret power here that holds evil from the land. Nevertheless, its folk are seldom seen, and maybe they dwell now deep in the woods and far from the northern border." "Indeed, deep in the woods they dwell," said Aragorn, and sighed as if some memory stirred him. "We must fend for ourselves tonight. We will go forward a short way until the trees are all around us, and then we will turn aside from the path and seek a place to rest in." He stepped forward, but Boromir stood irresolute and did not follow. "Is there no other way?" he said. "What other fairer way would you desire?" said Aragorn. "A plain road, though it led through a hedge of swords," said Boromir. "By strange paths has this company been led, and so far to evil fortune. Against my will we passed under the shades of Moria to our loss, and now we must enter the Golden Wood, you say. But of that perilous land we have heard in Gondor, and it is said that few come out who once go in, and of that few none have escaped unscathed." "Say not unscathed, but if you say unchanged, then maybe you will speak the truth," said Aragorn. "But lore wanes in Gondor, Boromir, if in the city of those who once were wise they now speak evil of Lothlorien. Believe what you will, there is no other way for us, unless you would go back to the Moria Gate, or scale the pathless mountains, or swim the great river all alone." "Then lead on," said Boromir, "but it is perilous." "Perilous indeed," said Aragorn. "Fair and perilous, but only evil need fear it, or those who bring some evil with them. Follow me." They had gone little more than a mile into the forest when they came upon another stream flowing down swiftly from the tree-clad slopes that climbed back westward towards the mountains. They heard it splashing over a fall away among the shadows on their right. Its dark, hurrying waters ran across the path before them and joined the Silverlode in a swirl of dim pools among the roots of trees. "Here is Nimrodel," said Legolas. "Of this stream the Sylvan elves made many songs long ago, and still we sing them in the north, remembering the rainbow on its falls and the golden flowers that floated in its foam. All is dark now, and the bridge of Nimrodel is broken down. I will bathe my feet, for it is said that the water is healing to the weary." He went forward and climbed down to the deep cloven bank and stepped across into the stream. "Follow me," he cried. "The water is not deep. Let us wade across. On the further bank we can rest, and the sound of the falling water may bring us sleep and forgetfulness of grief." One by one they climbed down and followed Legolas. For a moment Frodo stood near the brink and let the water flow over his tired feet. It was cold, but its touch was clean, and as he went on and it mounted to his knees, he felt that the stain of travel and all weariness was washed from his limbs. When all the company had crossed, they sat and rested and ate a little food, and Legolas told them tales of Lothlorien and the elves of Mirkwood still kept in their hearts, of sunlight and starlight upon the meadows by the great river before the world was grey. At length a silence fell, and they heard the music of the waterfall running sweetly in the shadows. Almost Frodo fancied he could hear a voice singing, mingled with the sound of the water. "Do you hear the voice of Nimrodel?" asked Legolas. "I will sing you a song of the maiden Nimrodel, who bore the same name as the stream beside which she lived long ago. It is a fair song in our woodland tongue, but this is how it runs in the Western speech, as some in Rivendell now sing it." In a soft voice hardly to be heard amid the rustle of the leaves above him, then he began. "An elfin maid who was of old, a shining star by day. Her mantle white was hemmed with gold, her shoes of silver gray. A star was bound upon her brows, a light was on her hair, as sun upon the golden boughs in Lorien the fair. Her hair was long, her limbs were white, and fair she was and free, and in the wind she went as light as leaf of linden tree. Beside the falls of Nimrodel, by water clear and cool, her voice as falling silver fell into the shining pool. Where now she wanders none can tell, in sunlight or in shade, for lost in yore was Nimrodel, and in the mountains strayed. The elven ship in haven grey, beneath the mountain lee, awaited her for many a day, beside the roaring sea. A wind by night in northern lands arose and loud it cried, and drove the ship from elven strands across the streaming tide. When dark came dim, the land was lost, the mountains sinking gray, beyond the heaving waves that tossed their plumes of blinding spray. Amroth beheld the fading shore, now low beyond the swell, and cursed the faithless ship that bore him far from Nimrodel. Of old he was an elven king, a lord of tree and glen, when golden were the boughs in spring in fair Lothlorien. From helm to sea they saw him leap as arrow from the string, and dive into the water deep as mew upon the wing. The wind was in his flowing hair, the foam about him shone. Afar they saw him strong and fair, go riding like a swan. But from the west has come no word, and on the hither shore no tidings elven folk have heard of Amroth evermore. The voice of Legolas faltered, and the song ceased. "I cannot sing any more," he said. "That is but a part, for I have forgotten much. It is long and sad, for it tells how sorrow came upon Lothlorien, Lorien of the Blossom, when the dwarves awakened evil in the mountains." "But the dwarves did not make the evil," said Gimli. "I said not so, yet evil came," answered Legolas sadly. "Then many of the elves of Nimrodel's kindred left their dwellings and departed, and she was lost far in the south, in the passes of the White Mountains, and she came not to the ship where Amroth her lover waited for her. But in the spring, when the wind is in the new leaves, the echo of her voice may still be heard by the falls that bear her name. And when the wind is in the south, the voice of Amroth comes up from the sea. For Nimrodel flows into the Silverlode, that the elves called Celebrant, and Celebrant into Anduin the Great, and Anduin flows into the Bay of Bephalas, whence the elves of Lorien set sail. But neither Nimrodel nor Amroth ever came back. It is told that she had a house built in the branches of a tree that grew near the falls, for that was the custom of the elves of Lorien, to dwell in the trees, and maybe it is so still. Therefore they were called the Galadrim, the tree people. Deep in their forest the trees are very great. The people of the woods did not delve into the ground like dwarves, nor build strong places of stone before the shadow came. And even in these later days, dwelling in the trees might be thought safer than sitting on the ground, said Gimli. He looked across the stream to the road that led back to Dimril Dale, and then up into the roof of dark boughs above. Your words bring good counsel, Gimli, said Aragorn. We cannot build a house, but tonight we will do as the Galadrim and seek refuge in the treetops if we can. We have sat here beside the road already longer than is wise. The company now turned aside from the path and went into the shadow of the deeper woods, westward along the mountain stream away from the Silverlode. Not far from the falls of Nimrodel, they found a cluster of trees, some of which overhung the stream. Their great grey trunks were of mighty girth, but their height could not be guessed. I will climb up, said Legolas. I am at home among trees, by root or bough, though these trees are of a kind strange to me, save as a name in song. Melrin they are called, and are those that bear the yellow blossom, but I have never climbed in one. I will see now what is their shape and way of growth. Whatever it may be, said Pippin, they will be marvelous trees indeed if they can offer any rest at night except to birds. I cannot sleep on a perch. Then dig a hole in the ground, said Legolas, if that is more after the fashion of your kind. But you must dig swift and deep if you wish to hide from orcs. He sprang lightly up from the ground and caught a branch that grew from the trunk high above his head. But even as he swung there for a moment, a voice spoke suddenly from the tree shadows above him. Dotto, it said in a commanding tone, and Legolas dropped back to earth in surprise and fear. He shrank against the bole of the tree. Stand still, he whispered to the others. Do not move or speak. There was a sound of soft laughter over their heads, and then another clear voice spoke in an elven tongue. Frodo could understand little of what was said, for the speech that the Sylvan folk east of the mountains used among themselves was unlike that of the west. Legolas looked up and answered in the same language. Who are they, and what do they say? Asked Merry. They're elves, said Sam. Can't you hear their voices? Yes, they are elves, said Legolas. And they say that you breathe so loud that they could shoot you in the dark. Sam hastily put his hand over his mouth. But they say also that you need have no fear. They have been aware of us for a long while. They heard my voice across the Nimrodel and knew that I was one of their northern kindred, and therefore they did not hinder our crossing. And afterwards they heard my song. Now they bid me climb up with Frodo, for they seem to have had some tidings of him and our journey. The others they asked to wait a little and to keep watch at the foot of the tree until they have decided what is to be done. Out of the shadows a ladder was let down. It was made of rope, silver gray and glimmering in the dark, and though it looked slender, it proved strong enough to bear many men. Legolas ran lightly up, and Frodo followed slowly. Behind came Sam, trying not to breathe loudly. The branches of the Malorn tree grew out nearly straight from the trunk, and then swept upwards, but near the top the main stem divided into a crown of many boughs, and among these they found that there had been built a wooden platform, or flet, as such things were called in those days. The elves called it a talon. It was reached by a round hole in the center through which the ladder passed. When Frodo came at last up onto the flet, he found Legolas seated with 3 other elves. They were clad in shadowy gray and could not be seen among the tree stems unless they moved suddenly. They stood up, and one of them uncovered a small lamp that gave out a slender silver beam. He held it up, looking at Frodo's face and Sam's. Then he shut off the light again and spoke words of welcome in his elven tongue. Frodo spoke haltingly in return. Welcome, said the elf. The elf then said again in the common language, speaking slowly. We seldom use any tongue but our own, for we dwell now in the heart of the forest, and do not willingly have dealings with other folk. Even our own kindred in the north are sundered from us. But there are some of us still who go abroad for the gathering of news and the watching of our enemies, and they speak the languages of other lands. I am one. Haldir is my name. My brothers Rumil and Orofin speak little of your tongue. But we have heard rumors of your coming, for the messengers of Elrond passed by Lorien on their way home up the Dimral Stair. We had not heard of hobbits, of halflings, for many a long year, and did not know that any yet dwelt in Middle-earth. You do not look evil, and since you come with an elf of our kindred, we are willing to befriend you, as Elrond asked, though it is not our custom to lead strangers through our land. But you must stay here tonight. How many are you? 8, said Legolas. Myself, 4 hobbits, and 2 men, one of whom Aragorn is an elf friend of the folk of Westerness. The name of Aragorn, son of Arathorn, is known in Lorien, said Haldir, and he has the favor of the lady. All then is well. But you have yet spoken only of 7. The 8th is a dwarf, said Legolas. A dwarf, said Haldir. That is not well. We have not had dealings with the dwarves since the dark days. They are not permitted in our land. I cannot allow him to pass. But he is from the Lonely Mountain, one of Dane's trusty people, and friendly to Elrond, said Frodo. Elrond himself chose him to be one of our companions, and he has been brave and faithful. The elves spoke together in soft voices and questioned Legolas in their own tongue. Very good, said Haldir at last. We will do this, though it is against our liking. If Aragorn and Legolas will guard him and answer for him, he shall pass, but he must go blindfold through Lothlorien. But now we must debate no longer. Your folk must not remain on the ground. We have been keeping watch on the rivers ever since we saw a great troop of orcs going north towards Moria along the skirts of the mountains many days ago. Wolves are howling on the wood's borders. If you have indeed come from Moria, the peril cannot be far behind. Tomorrow early you must go on. The 4 hobbits shall climb up here and stay with us. We do not fear them. There is another talon in the next tree. There the others must take refuge. You, Legolas, must answer to us for them. Call us if anything is amiss, and have an eye on that dwarf. Legolas at once went down the ladder to take Haldir's message, and soon afterwards Merry and Pippin clambered up onto the high flet. They were out of breath and seemed rather scared. "There," said Merry, panting. "We have left up your blankets as well as our own. Strider has hidden all the rest of our baggage in a deep drift of leaves." "You had no need of your burden," said Haldir. "It is cold in the treetops in the winter, though the wind tonight is in the south, but we have food and drink to give you that will drive away the night chill, and we have skins and cloaks to spare." The hobbits accepted this second and far better supper very gladly. Then they wrapped themselves warmly, not only in the fur cloaks of the elves, but in their own blankets as well, and tried to go to sleep. But weary as they were, only Sam found that easy to do. Hobbits do not like heights, and they do not sleep upstairs, even when they have any stairs. The flat was not at all to their liking as a bedroom. It had no walls, not even a rail. Only on one side was there a light-plated screen which could be moved and fixed in different places according to the wind. Pippin went on talking for a while. "I hope if I do go to sleep in this bedloft that I shan't roll off," he said. "Once I do get to sleep," said Sam, "I shall go on sleeping whether I roll off or no, and the less said the sooner I'll drop off, if you take my meaning." Frodo lay for some time awake and looked up at the stars glinting through the pale roof of quivering leaves. Sam was snoring at his side long before he himself closed his eyes. He could dimly see the gray forms of the two elves sitting motionless with their arms about their knees, speaking in whispers. The other had gone down to take up his watch on one of the lower branches. At last, lulled by the wind in the boughs above and the sweet murmur of the falls of Nimrodel below, Frodo fell asleep with the song of Legolas running in his mind. Late in the night he awoke. The other hobbits were asleep. The elves were gone. The sickle moon was gleaming dimly among the leaves. The wind was still. A little way off he heard a harsh laugh and the tread of many feet on the ground below. There was a ring of metal. The sounds died slowly away and seemed to go southward, on into the wood. A head appeared suddenly through the hole in the flat. Frodo sat up in alarm and saw that it was a gray-hooded elf. He looked towards the hobbits. "What is it?" said Frodo. "Ich," said the elf in a hissing whisper, and cast onto the flat the rope ladder rolled up. "Orcs," said Frodo. "What are they doing?" The elf had gone. There were no more sounds. Even the leaves were silent, and the very falls seemed to be hushed. Frodo sat and shivered in his wraps. He was thankful that they had not been caught on the ground, but he felt that the trees offered little protection except concealment. Orcs were as keen as hounds on a scent, it was said, but they could also climb. He drew out Sting. It flashed and glittered like a blue flame, and then slowly faded again and grew dull. In spite of the fading of his sword, the feeling of immediate danger did not leave Frodo. Rather, it grew stronger. He got up and crawled to the opening and peered down. He was almost certain that he could hear stealthy movements at the tree's foot far below. Not elves, for the woodland folk were altogether noiseless in their movements. Then he heard faintly a sound like sniffing, and something seemed to be scrabbling on the bark of the tree trunk. He stared down into the dark, holding his breath. Something was now climbing slowly, and its breath came like a soft hissing through closed teeth. Then, coming up close to the stem, Frodo saw two pale eyes. They stopped and gazed upward, unwinking. Suddenly they turned away, and a shadowy figure slipped around the trunk of the tree and vanished. Immediately afterwards, Haldir came climbing swiftly up through the branches. "There was something in this tree that I have never seen before," he said. "It was not an orc. It fled as soon as I touched the tree stem. It seemed to be wary and to have some skill in trees, or I might have thought it was one of you hobbits. I did not shoot, for I dared not arouse any cries. We cannot risk battle. A strong company of orcs has passed. They crossed the Nimrodel, cursed their foul feet in its clean water, and went on down the old road beside the river. They seemed to pick up some scent, and they searched the ground for a while near the place where you halted. The three of us could not challenge 100, so we went ahead and spoke with feigned voices, leading them on into the wood. Orofin has now gone in haste back to our dwellings to warn our people. None of the orcs will ever return out of Lorien, and there will be many elves hidden on the northern border before another night falls. But you must take the road south as soon as it is fully light." And that is where we will leave off for today. Make sure you like and subscribe to join us again next Monday at 1:30 to find out more about Lothlorien. Have a great rest of your day. Bye!